I'm 73 years old now, and I've been carrying this story longer than most people carry a marriage. I started feeding something in the mountains back in April of 1978, thinking I was just doing a small kindness no one would ever notice. For 46 years, I kept my mouth shut while the world argued about whether Bigfoot was real. I'm telling it now because the last one is gone, and because what they left behind showed me they've been watching us a lot longer than we've been watching them. My name is Carl Winters. In April of 1978, I was 27 years old and working as a trail maintenance carpenter for the U.S. Forest Service on the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada. I'd taken the job 8 months earlier because I was tired of people. Tired of supervisors who cared more about paperwork than actual work, and tired of pretending I enjoyed living in town. The mountains didn't ask questions. They didn't care if you showed up to Friday night drinks or remembered someone's birthday. You did your job, you kept your head down, and at the end of the day, the only voice you heard was your own. On April 19, 1978, I was 2 miles up an abandoned logging spur road, repairing a culvert that had washed out during the winter melt. The snow was mostly gone at that elevation, maybe 5,800 feet, but the ground was still soggy, and the creek was running high and brown with runoff. I had a shovel, a handsaw, and a thermos of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I was humming "Dust in the Wind" because I'd heard it on the radio that morning, and because the supervisor who trained me said humming kept bears from sneaking up on you. Mostly, I think I hummed because the silence up there could get so heavy it felt like something you had to push against. I was knee-deep in mud, trying to lever a piece of rotted culvert pipe out of the creek bed when I heard the footfalls. Heavy, uneven, coming from uphill through the alders. I stopped humming, stood still. The sound wasn't right for elk. Too slow, too deliberate. Not a bear either. Bears don't walk like that, don't move with that kind of weight behind each step. And then I heard something else. A cough. Wet, rattling, chest deep. The kind of sound that meant infection or injury, the kind that made your own lungs tighten in sympathy. The alders about 40 yards uphill started bending, not swaying in the wind. Bending like something big was pushing through them, then snapping back. I could hear branches breaking, the sharp crack of green wood giving way. And then I smelled it. Copper, blood, definitely blood. But underneath that, something else. Musky, dense, like wet earth and animal hide, and something I couldn't place. It wasn't rotten, it was just different. Old, like the smell of a cave that hasn't seen sunlight in years. I should have walked away. Should have gotten back in my truck and driven down to the ranger station and told someone there was an injured animal up the drainage. But I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I was just so used to being alone that the idea of something else suffering up there, unseen, felt like a responsibility I couldn't ignore. I grabbed my shovel and started uphill, moving slowly, calling out every few steps. Easy, easy, I'm not here to hurt you. Like whatever it was could understand English. Like my voice meant anything at all. The drag mark started about 20 yards up, wide, asymmetrical, gouged deep into the wet soil. And blood. Not a lot, but enough. Smeared on the granite outcropping at waist height, dark and sticky. I followed the trail into a shallow ravine choked with snowbrush and manzanita. And that's when I saw her. She was lying on her side, partially hidden, one massive arm stretched out in front of her like she'd been trying to pull herself forward. Dark fur, almost black in the shadows, streaked with gray at the shoulders. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Broad across the chest, long-armed, heavily muscled. And her left thigh was torn open, the steel jaws of a leg-hold trap buried deep in the muscle. I stopped breathing. She turned her head toward me. Slowly, deliberately. Her eyes were brown, deep-set, and they tracked me with an intelligence that made my stomach drop. Not wild, not animal. Calculating. 20 yards uphill, I heard voices, Two men arguing in low tones. One of them saying they should come back with a truck. The other one saying it wasn't worth the risk, that she'd probably be dead by morning anyway. I crouched behind a manzanita and watched her watch me. She didn't make a sound, didn't snarl or thrash or try to drag herself away. She just looked at me, and I understood, in a way I can't explain, that she was deciding whether I was like them or not. I waited until the voices faded. Waited until I heard a truck engine turn over somewhere down the mountain. Then I stood up, slowly, and took a step toward her. She flinched, just barely, but she didn't run. I knelt down about 10 feet away, set the shovel aside, and held up both hands, palms out. "I'm going to help you," I said. My voice sounded strange, too loud in the quiet. "I don't know if you understand me, but I'm going to get that trap off." She raised her hand, the uninjured one, raised it slowly, trembling, and turned her palm toward me, the same gesture I'd just made. Palm out. Open. Deliberate. That's when I knew. I crawled forward, moving slowly, talking the whole time. Nonsense mostly. "Easy there. I know it hurts. This is going to hurt worse for a second, but then it'll be better. I promise. Just hold still." The trap was an old new house number 5, the kind they'd outlawed years ago, but that you could still find rusting in old trapper sheds. The spring was heavy, the jaws sunk deep. It took me 20 minutes to pry it open, using the shovel handle as a lever, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it twice. When the jaws finally released, she made a sound. Low, guttural, resonant, not a scream. More like a groan of relief that had been trapped in her chest for hours. I dragged the trap away, threw it as far as I could into the brush. When I turned back, she was looking at me, still calculating, still deciding. "I'm going to bring you food," I said. "Tonight, after dark. I'll leave it where you can reach it, and then I'll go. You don't have to trust me. You just have to stay alive." I don't know if she understood the words, but she understood the tone. Because when I stood up and backed away, she didn't try to follow. She just watched me go, her eyes never leaving mine until I disappeared into the trees. You have to understand why I did what I did, why I didn't tell anyone, why I went back. I grew up in Fresno, the youngest of 4 boys in a house that was always too loud and too full. My brothers were athletes, loud and easy with people, the kind of kids who made friends without trying. I wasn't like that. I was the one who spent recess sitting under the bleachers with a book, who volunteered for solo projects, who felt more comfortable with silence than small talk. My mother used to say I was born old, born tired of noise. After high school, I tried college for a year and hated it. Tried construction in Sacramento and hated that too. Too many people, too many opinions, too much expectation that you'd care about things that didn't matter. When I saw the Forest Service posting for trail maintenance in 1977, it felt like a door opening, remote postings, weeks alone in the backcountry, supervisors who only checked in once a month. It was perfect, but it also meant I knew what loneliness looked like. Real loneliness, the kind where you go 3 weeks without hearing another human voice. And I knew what it felt like to be different, to be the thing that didn't quite fit, that people looked at sideways and didn't know what to do with. When I looked at her that day, bleeding in the ravine, I didn't see a monster. I saw something that had been hurt by people who saw her as a trophy, a conversation piece, a thing to be captured and paraded and pointed at. I saw something alone. So I went back. I waited until full dark around 10 p.m. and loaded up my truck with everything I could spare from my own supplies. A bag of apples from the grocery run I'd made the week before, a package of beef jerky, 2 pounds of oats I'd bought to make oatmeal for myself. I drove back up the logging road with my headlights off, navigating by moonlight, and hiked in with a flashlight I kept pointed at the ground. I left the food 30 feet from where she'd been lying, arranged it on a flat rock, and backed away. Didn't call out, didn't try to see if she was still there, just left it and walked back to my truck. The next morning, the food was gone. So was she. But there were tracks in the mud, massive, elongated, human-like but not human, 15 inches long, maybe more. And heading deeper into the mountains, away from the road, away from people. I should have left it at that, should have told myself I'd done my good deed and moved on. But I didn't. I went back 3 days later with more food, left it in the same spot. It was gone by morning. A week later, I went back again. This time I found a stone placed deliberately on top of the rock where I'd been leaving the food. Smooth, fist-sized, balanced carefully in the center. It hadn't been there before. That's when I understood. She was acknowledging me, telling me she knew I was coming, telling me, in her own way, that she saw me too. I kept going back, once a week at first, then twice a week. I bought extra supplies whenever I went into town, always paying cash, always varying which stores I went to so no one would notice the pattern. Apples, jerky, oats, dried fruit, peanut butter, day-old bread from the bakery. I told myself I was just being kind, that it wasn't hurting anyone, that no one needed to know. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I told someone. Afraid of what people would do if they knew she was up there. I'd seen those two men, heard the way they talked about her, like she was a thing, a prize, something to be taken and owned. I'd worked with enough hunters and loggers and developers to know how this would go. Helicopters, dogs, tranquilizer guns, cameras, a cage if she was lucky, a bullet if she wasn't. So I kept my mouth shut. I altered my patrol logs, claiming I was working sections of trail I'd already finished, giving myself excuses to be in that drainage without raising questions. I started carrying supplies in a pack instead of leaving them in the truck bed where someone might see. I learned to move quietly, to read the weather so I could go in when visibility was low and no one else would be on the mountain. And slowly, over weeks and then months, I stopped being afraid, because I realized she wasn't just surviving, she was learning me. By the end of May 1978, I'd established what I started calling only to myself the feeding station. It was a flat granite shelf about 100 yards off the abandoned logging road, tucked into a stand of old-growth pine where the canopy was thick enough that you couldn't see it from above. I'd pile the food there every Tuesday and Friday night, always after dark, always alone. And it was always gone by morning. In June, I saw her for the second time. I'd just set down a bag of apples and a plastic container of leftover stew when I heard a branch snap behind me. I turned slowly, and there she was, 30 feet away, half hidden behind a sugar pine. Watching? Her thigh had healed, but the scar was visible even in the dim light, a thick rope of tissue cutting across the dark fur. She was standing fully upright, and I realized I'd underestimated her size. 8.5 feet, maybe 9. Her shoulders were broader than any man I'd ever seen. Her arms hung past her knees, and her hands were massive, long-fingered, almost delicate in the way they rested against her thighs. We looked at each other for maybe 30 seconds. I didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed, slow and steady, and kept my hands visible. Then she stepped forward. One step, stopped. Another step, stopped. Testing me, I took a step back, giving her space, showing her I understood. She moved to the granite shelf, knelt down with a fluidity that seemed impossible for something that size, and picked up one of the apples. She turned it over in her hands, examining it, then bit into it with a crunch that echoed through the trees. She ate slowly, methodically, and when she was done, she set the core down deliberately, stood, and walked back into the darkness without a sound. I started calling her May, short for matriarch. It wasn't a name born out of affection, not at first. It was practical, a way to keep emotional distance, to remind myself that this was observation, not friendship. But names have weight, and over time, May became more than a designation. She became a presence, a constant, the only other living thing that knew my routine as well as I did. By the fall of 1978, I'd learned her patterns. She came to the feeding station most often on Tuesday nights, less often on Fridays. She preferred apples over anything else, wouldn't touch citrus, and only ate meat if it was fresh. Dried jerky she'd leave behind. A rabbit I'd trapped and cleaned, she took immediately. She moved in absolute silence when she wanted to, could appear 10 feet away without snapping a single twig. But other times, she'd make noise deliberately, letting me know she was coming, giving me time to back away. She was teaching me her language. In November, the poachers came back. I was heading up to the feeding station on a Thursday night, later than usual, because I'd been held up at the ranger station doing equipment inventory. I was maybe a quarter mile out when I saw flashlight beams cutting through the trees ahead. Heard voices. Low, male, excited. I killed my own flashlight and moved forward in the dark, using the trees for cover. There were 3 of them this time, dressed in camo, carrying rifles. They were standing near the feeding station, examining the granite shelf, shining their lights on the ground. "Tracks everywhere," one of them said. "Fresh." "Told you," another one replied. "Something's been coming here regular." "We set up trail cams, we'll get a picture," the third one said. "Then we'll know what we're dealing with." I stepped out into their flashlight beams with my hands up, doing my best impression of a startled but friendly park employee. "Evening, gentlemen. Little late for a hike, isn't it?" They spun toward me, rifles coming up before they recognized the Forest Service uniform. The oldest one, maybe 50, lowered his gun and forced a laugh. "Jesus, you scared us. We're just doing some night scouting. Heard there might be a big cat up here." "No cats in this drainage," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Just black bear and they're bedded down this time of year. You guys have permits for night hunting?" The question hung there. We all knew they didn't. "We weren't hunting," the younger one said. "Just looking." "Well, you picked a bad spot for it," I said. "This whole section's closed for erosion control. I'm going to have to ask you to head back down. I'll walk you out. Make sure you don't get turned around in the dark." It wasn't a request. They knew it. 20 minutes later, I watched their truck disappear down the mountain, and I stood there in the dark, my heart hammering, wondering if May had been close enough to hear them, wondering if she understood how close they'd come. I didn't leave food that night, didn't go back for a week. When I finally returned, there were branches laid across the path leading to the feeding station, arranged in an X pattern. A barrier, a warning. I understood. She'd seen them too. And she was telling me the rules had changed. I moved the feeding station deeper into the drainage, another half-mile in, to a spot where you couldn't get to without serious backcountry navigation. I stopped going in on predictable days. Started varying my approach, coming in from different directions, never using a flashlight unless absolutely necessary. And I started carrying a sidearm, a .357 revolver I'd bought years ago and never used. Not for her, for anyone who might come looking. The winter of 1978 into 1979 was hard. Heavy snow, temperatures dropping below zero most nights. I couldn't get into the new feeding station more than once or twice a month, and even then, I wasn't sure if she was finding the food or if the snow was just burying it. I started having dreams about her freezing, starving, dying alone in a snowbank because I hadn't brought enough, hadn't planned better. In March, when the snow finally started to melt, I hiked in on the first clear day and found the new feeding site undisturbed. No tracks, no sign anyone had been there, human or otherwise. I left food anyway, a double portion, just in case, and hiked back out feeling hollow. 2 days later, I returned to find not just the food gone, but something else. A fish skeleton, cleaned so perfectly it looked like it had been prepared for a biology class, laid out on the rock in anatomical order. Every bone in place. Deliberate. May was still alive. And she was saying thank you. That spring, I saw him for the first time. I was coming in just after dawn on a Saturday in late April, carrying 50 pounds of supplies in my pack, when I rounded a bend in the trail and stopped dead. There was another one, bigger than May, maybe 10 feet tall, with broader shoulders and fur so dark it looked black even in the sunlight. He was standing in the middle of the trail, facing me, arms slightly away from his body. Not threatening, just present. We stared at each other. I could hear my pulse in my ears, feel sweat starting to bead on my forehead despite the cool air. He took a step forward, stopped, tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to understand something. And then May appeared. She came out of the trees to his left, moving between us, and placed one hand on his chest. She turned her head toward me, then back to him, and made a sound. Low, rhythmic, almost like speech. He listened, looked at me again, then stepped off the trail and disappeared into the forest. May stayed for a moment longer, watching me, and then she followed him. I stood there for 10 minutes after they left, trying to process what had just happened. The conclusion was unavoidable. May hadn't just tolerated my presence. She'd vouched for me, explained me in whatever way they communicated. And he'd listened. I started calling him the patriarch, not because I knew for certain he was male, but because of the way he carried himself, the way May deferred to him in that moment. Over the next few years, I'd see him maybe a dozen times, always at a distance, always watching. He never came to the feeding station when I was there, never approached. But I'd find his tracks sometimes, massive prints even larger than May's, circling the area like he was checking on things. They were a family. I understood that by the summer of 1981, and I was being allowed to exist on the periphery of it, tolerated as long as I followed their rules. Didn't push, didn't intrude, didn't bring others. It was a humbling thing, realizing you're not trusted, just tolerated. In August of 1986, everything changed again. I was at the feeding station just after sunset, unloading supplies, when I heard it. A pattern of knocks, wood on wood, echoing through the trees. 3 short, pause. 2 short, pause. 1 long. I'd been using that exact pattern for years, knocking on tree trunks to announce my arrival, to let May know I was coming in. It was my signature, the rhythm I'd chosen, because it was easy to remember and didn't sound like anything natural. And now something was knocking it back to me. I stood still, listening. The knocks came again, closer this time. 3 short, 2 short, 1 long. Perfect replication. I grabbed a stick and knocked it against a pine trunk. 3 short, 2 short, 1 long. Silence. Then, from a different direction, the pattern repeated. I turned toward the sound and saw movement, low to the ground, maybe 4 feet high. 2 shapes moving through the underbrush with a careful, deliberate gait. Juveniles. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, maybe 40 feet away, partially hidden behind a fallen log. I could see their eyes catching the last of the daylight, wide and curious. One of them knocked again, softer this time, hitting the log with what looked like a small branch. 3 short, 2 short, 1 long. They were learning, mimicking, playing maybe, or trying to understand what the sound meant. And they'd learned it from watching May, watching me, watching us communicate in this strange, invented language neither of us had ever spoken out loud. I felt something crack open in my chest. Wonder, awe. The understanding that I wasn't just feeding an injured animal anymore. I was watching culture being transmitted, watching behavior being taught from one generation to another. I knocked back, gentle, non-threatening. The juveniles, startled, ducked behind the log, then slowly peeked back out. One of them knocked again, this time just 2 short taps. Experimental. Different. I matched it. 2 short. From somewhere deeper in the forest, May called out. A long, rising vocalization that sounded almost like a question. The juveniles immediately turned and disappeared into the brush, moving with surprising speed. I didn't see them again for weeks after that, and when I did, they were always with May or the patriarch, always kept at a distance. But sometimes, when I was leaving the feeding station, I'd hear those knocks echoing through the trees. 3 short, 2 short, 1 long. A reminder that they were there, that they remembered. By the early 1990s, I'd been keeping this secret for over a decade. It had become the organizing principle of my life. Every decision I made, every relationship I avoided, every lie I told to supervisors or coworkers about where I was spending my time, it all revolved around protecting May and her family. I was 39 years old in 1990, and I'd never had a serious relationship. A few dates here and there, women I'd meet in town or at ranger station socials, but nothing that lasted more than a few weeks. How could it? What was I supposed to say when someone asked why I was always hiking alone, always turning down invitations, always disappearing into the mountains on my days off? I couldn't tell the truth. And the lies made me feel like I was living inside a shell, performing a version of myself that wasn't quite real. My mother called once a month, asking when I was going to settle down, find someone, give her grandchildren. My brothers had all done it, had families and houses and normal lives in normal towns. They looked at me like I was stuck, like I'd failed to grow up. And maybe they were right. But I couldn't explain that I'd found something more important than a wife or kids. I'd found proof that the world was stranger and more wonderful than anyone imagined. And keeping that secret felt like the most important thing I'd ever do. In September of 1994, a Forest Service helicopter flew over the drainage doing a survey for beetle kill. I was at the feeding station when I heard it, the rotor wash getting louder, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls. I looked up and saw it pass directly overhead, low enough that I could see the pilot's face through the windscreen. I dropped to the ground instinctively, knowing it was probably too late, knowing they'd already seen me if they were looking. My mind raced through explanations. I was surveying the trail, checking on erosion, looking for illegal campsites. The helicopter circled once, then continued up the canyon. I didn't move for 5 minutes. When I finally stood, I heard crashing in the forest around me. Heavy footfalls, multiple sources, moving fast and panicked. May and the patriarch were getting the juveniles out, running deeper into the wilderness, away from the noise and the threat. They didn't come back for a month. When May finally returned to the feeding station in late October, she was alone. She wouldn't come within 100 feet of me, stayed in the shadows at the tree line, watching. I left the food and backed away, giving her space. It took 3 more visits before she'd approached the feeding site while I was still visible, and even then she was skittish, constantly looking up at the sky like she expected the helicopter to return at any moment. That's when I understood what safety cost them. They couldn't just trust me. They had to trust that I wouldn't bring others, that my presence didn't carry the threat of exposure, of discovery, of everything that would follow. And I'd failed that test, even if it wasn't my fault. The helicopter had proven that my world and theirs could collide at any moment, without warning, without mercy. I became even more careful after that. Started keeping a log of helicopter flight paths, learned the survey schedules, made sure I was never at the feeding station during high traffic periods. I stopped carrying anything that could reflect light, wore dark clothes, moved like I was sneaking through enemy territory. Because in a way, I was. The years blurred together after that. 1995, 1996, 1997. The juveniles grew. I'd catch glimpses of them sometimes, taller now, more confident, moving with the same fluid grace as their parents. By 1998, they looked nearly adult-sized. By 2000, I couldn't tell them apart from May and the patriarch unless I was close enough to see the scarring on May's thigh. In the spring of 2001, May left me something different. I came to the feeding station on a Tuesday in April and found, laid carefully in the center of the granite shelf, a stick. It was about 18 inches long, stripped of bark and carved. The marks were crude, made with something sharp, maybe a rock or a claw. But they were deliberate. 4 figures scratched into the wood in simple vertical lines with smaller horizontal marks for arms. And next to them, a cluster of wavy lines that could have been fire or water or just abstract marks. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, felt the weight of it. This wasn't food left as thanks. This wasn't stones arranged in patterns. This was symbolic thought, representation, art. I stood there holding it, my hands shaking, trying not to cry, because this was proof. Proof that they didn't just survive, didn't just exist. They thought, they conceptualized. They had something we'd always claimed was ours alone: imagination. I took the stick home, hid it in my cabin, wrapped in canvas, tucked in the back of a closet where no one would ever find it. I didn't tell anyone, didn't photograph it, didn't write about it. I just kept it, and every few months I'd take it out and look at it and feel the weight of what it meant. By 2005, I'd been feeding May's family for 27 years. I was 54 years old, my knees were starting to ache on the long hikes in, and I was thinking more and more about what would happen when I couldn't do this anymore. When I retired, or got reassigned, or just got too old to carry 50 pounds of supplies through rough terrain in the dark. I was also thinking about May. She had to be at least as old as I was, maybe older. The gray at her shoulders had spread down her back, and she moved more slowly now, with a careful deliberation that spoke of pain she wasn't showing. The patriarch was graying too, silver creeping into the dark fur around his face. In October of 2010, I went to the feeding station and found May waiting for me, not hidden in the trees, not watching from a distance, sitting on the granite shelf in full view in the middle of the afternoon. I stopped walking. She didn't move. I set down my pack and walked forward slowly, stopping about 20 feet away. "Hey, May," I said. My voice sounded rough, uncertain. "You feeling okay?" She looked at me for a long time, then she reached out one hand, palm up, and made a sound. Low, soft, almost plaintive. A sound I'd never heard her make before. I didn't know what she was asking for, didn't know if she was saying goodbye or asking for help or just acknowledging one last time that she saw me. I took 3 steps forward, close enough that I could smell her, that mix of musk and earth and something indefinably her. Close enough that I could see the details of her face, the way her eyes tracked me, the silver in her fur catching the light. "Thank you," I said, "for letting me be part of this, for trusting me." She lowered her hand, stood, and walked away into the trees, moving with that careful, pained deliberation. I didn't see her again. In November, I found the patriarch at the feeding station, alone. He took the food without hesitation, without his usual wariness, and when he left, he didn't disappear silently. He looked back once, a long, deliberate look, and then he continued into the forest. I understood. May was gone. Dead, probably, somewhere deep in the mountains where I'd never find her. And the patriarch was taking over the routine, honoring the pattern we'd established, keeping the connection alive. He came regularly for the next 8 years, sometimes alone, sometimes with one of the juveniles, now fully grown. The pattern held, Tuesday and Friday nights, food left on the granite shelf, the slow, careful dance of trust we'd been performing for decades. But things were changing. The Forest Service was pushing more recreation development, more trails, more permits for guided tours. The remote drainage I'd been protecting was becoming less remote. I started finding trash at the trailheads, boot prints from hikers who'd wandered off the Yasi, marked paths. Twice I found drone wreckage, hobbyists flying into the backcountry for aerial photography. In the summer of 2018, I found the pictographs. They were on a rock face about a quarter-mile from the feeding station, in a spot I'd walked past 1,000 times but never really looked at. The marks were made with something dark, maybe charcoal or burnt wood, etched into the stone in layers. Humans? Drawn small, stick-figured, but unmistakable. Some were holding lines that could have been weapons. Others stood around clusters of crossed lines that looked like fire. In one section, humans fought with each other, tiny figures tangled together. And around the edges, watching from the periphery, were larger figures. The Bigfoot family. Always separate, always at a distance, never attacking, never approaching, just watching. One symbol repeated throughout. A human figure drawn slightly apart from the others, with one hand extended. Offering something. Food, maybe? Or peace? Me? They'd drawn me. I stood there for an hour, studying the pictographs, trying to understand what they meant. Were they a record? A warning? A history passed down through generations? And then I saw the newest marks, fresher than the others, not weathered like the rest. More humans, drawn in larger groups, more fires, more weapons, more conflict among themselves. And the Bigfoot figures, drawn smaller now, pushed further to the edges. They were telling me something, showing me what they saw. That humans weren't just a threat because we were violent. We were a threat because we were chaotic, unpredictable, because we fought among ourselves and burned our own world and never learned restraint. We were dangerous children who'd never grown up. I stopped sleeping well after that, started having dreams about helicopters and hunters and developers with bulldozers, all of them converging on the drainage, all of them tearing through the forest looking for proof. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart hammering, wondering if I should stop. If my presence, no matter how careful, was marking a trail, others could follow. In January of 2020, the pandemic hit. The ranger station closed to the public. Trails were shut down. The mountains went quiet in a way I hadn't experienced since the 1970s. No hikers, no tourists, no helicopters doing surveys. Just silence. I kept feeding them through it all, kept hiking in with supplies, kept maintaining the routine. It felt important, keeping that one constant alive while the rest of the world fell apart. And maybe they understood in their way that the silence was temporary, that the humans would come back eventually, that they always did. The patriarch stopped coming in February of 2024. I waited 2 weeks, then 4, then 6. I hiked in every other day, left food, checked the pictographs. Nothing changed. No tracks, no knocks, no signs that anyone had been there. In March, I started searching. I expanded my range, hiked deeper into the eye. Backcountry than I'd ever gone, followed game trails and creek beds and ridgelines. Looking for any sign. Finding nothing. In April, 46 years, almost to the day after I'd first found May in that ravine, I found the dwelling. It was hidden in a rock shelter, a shallow cave maybe 15 feet deep, tucked into a cliff face that you couldn't see unless you were standing directly in front of it. The entrance was camouflaged with branches and deadfall, arranged carefully enough that it looked natural. Inside, the floor was covered with dried grass and pine boughs, layered thick. There were stones arranged in a circle, a fire pit that had been used recently enough that I could still smell the ash. And on the walls, more pictographs, hundreds of them, layers and layers, stretching back decades, maybe longer. I stood in the entrance, flashlight in hand, and understood that this was their history, their record. Everything they'd seen, everything they'd witnessed, drawn on stone and preserved. And in the center of the back wall, freshest of all, was the final message. More humans, drawn in vast numbers, covering the stone like a swarm. Fire everywhere. And the Bigfoot figures, drawn so small now, they were barely visible, retreating into empty space. And at the bottom, separate from everything else, a single human figure with one hand extended. And next to it, a much larger figure reaching back. Connection. Across the vast distance, across the fear and the difference and the impossibility of it. I sat down on the floor of that cave and cried for the first time in 30 years, because I understood. They were gone. Not dead necessarily, but gone, driven out by the encroachment, by the noise, by the endless human expansion that never stopped, never paused, never considered what it was pushing aside. They'd left me a record because I'd earned it, because I'd been the one human who'd tried to understand, who'd waited and listened and asked for nothing except the privilege of being allowed to help. And now, there was nothing left to help. I've been back to the cave 3 times since then, spring, summer, and fall of 2024. I've checked the feeding station, hiked every drainage within 20 miles, listened for knocks that never come. The forest feels different now, emptier, like something essential has been removed, and the ecosystem is still trying to figure out what's missing. I'm 73 years old, and I've spent more of my life keeping this secret than I spent living without it. I've lost relationships because of it, turned down promotions, stayed in a job I should have retired from a decade ago just to maintain access to these mountains. I've lied to everyone I know about what I was doing, where I was going, what mattered to me. And I'd do it all again, because for 46 years I was given a gift that maybe a dozen people in human history have received. I was trusted by something that had every reason to fear us, to hate us, to see us as the enemy. I was allowed to exist on the edge of their world, to witness their intelligence, their compassion, their capacity for connection across a gap so wide it shouldn't have been crossable. I learned more about what it means to be human by watching something that wasn't human than I ever learned from other people. May taught me patience. The patriarch taught me humility. The juveniles taught me that curiosity and fear can coexist, that you can be wary and still be willing to learn. And all of them, together, taught me that the world doesn't belong to us. We're just one species among many, and the fact that we're clever enough to dominate doesn't mean we're wise enough to deserve it. The pictographs in that cave show a history of watching, generations of them, observing humans, drawing what they saw, trying to understand us. And what they concluded over decades or maybe centuries of observation was that we're brilliant and terrible in equal measure, that we build and destroy with the same hands, that we can be gentle and vicious, curious and closed-minded, capable of profound connection and profound cruelty. We're dangerous because we don't know when to stop, because we see empty spaces and feel compelled to fill them, because we can't leave well enough alone. They left because they understood something we still haven't figured out. That sharing space means respecting boundaries. That survival sometimes means retreat. That not every problem can be solved by force or persistence, or the sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Sometimes you just have to let go. I'm telling this story now because there's no one left to endanger, because the mountains they lived in are being carved up for development, and within 5 years there will be luxury cabins and guided tour groups and interpretive signs talking about the legend of Bigfoot sightings in the area. Because if I don't tell it, this will die with me, and the world will go on arguing about whether they ever existed while the evidence of their intelligence, their culture, their humanity sits hidden in a cave that will probably be bulldozed to make room for a parking lot. I've brought the carved stick with me today, the one May left in 2001 with the 4 figures and the fire marks. I'm donating it to a private collection, anonymously, where it will be preserved and studied by people who might actually understand what it represents. I'm also providing GPS coordinates to the cave, but only to a trust that won't act on them until after my death. By then, maybe the development will have moved on. Maybe the forest will be protected. Or maybe it won't matter anymore. Maybe the record they left will be the only thing remaining to prove they were here at all. I've spent 46 years being silent, and that silence has hollowed me out in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. I've watched friends grow old and die, watched the world change in ways I never anticipated, watched the wilderness I tried to protect shrink year after year. And through it all, I kept this one secret, this one impossible truth, locked away where no one could touch it. But secrets have weight. They accumulate like sediment, layer after layer, until you're not sure anymore where the secret ends and you begin. I am 73 years old, and I am tired of carrying this alone. So I'm telling it. Not because I expect anyone to believe me, not because I think it will change anything, but because May and the patriarch and their children deserve to be remembered as more than legends. They deserve to be known as what they were: intelligent, compassionate, careful, capable of communication, of culture, of choice. They were people. Different from us, yes, but people nonetheless. And they chose to leave rather than fight us. They chose survival over confrontation. They chose to preserve themselves by removing themselves from our path. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. I think about May sometimes, bleeding in that ravine, making the choice to trust me. I think about the patriarch standing in the trail, letting her vouch for me instead of driving me away. I think about those juveniles mimicking my knocking pattern, trying to understand this strange human who kept showing up with food and asking for nothing in return. They took a risk on me, and I spent the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. I don't know where they are now. Don't know if they found another remote drainage, another hidden valley where humans haven't yet reached. Don't know if they're thriving or struggling, or if they've given up and faded into extinction. But I know they were here. I know they saw us, studied us, tried to understand us, and I know what they concluded: that we're not monsters. We're just children playing with matches in a world made of kindling. Clever enough to create fire, but not wise enough to control it. They left us a message in that cave, written in charcoal and etched in stone. A record of watching, a history of caution, a final statement about what they learned. And the message was simple. They see us. They understand us. And they've chosen to disappear rather than watch us burn everything down. I'm 73 years old, and I've been carrying this story longer than most people carry a marriage. I'm telling it now, not because I want recognition or vindication or proof. I'm telling it because silence protected them while they were here. But now that they're gone, silence only erases them. They existed. They mattered. They were here. And that truth, at least, deserves to survive.